He's like, dude, there's Billy Joe from Green Day. And he's standing outside. And I go over to him and I said, hi, I'm Brian Molloy. I'm on the back cover of your album. And he's like, oh, Brian, nice to meet you. And he starts talking to me. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, oh, we got a cease and desist order from Jim Henson's estate. A parent bought it and thought it was a kid's record. But don't worry, there's 1 million out there with you on it.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was the Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 New Jersey punk rock scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Brian Molloy cut his teeth in the punk scene before Green Day and The Offspring took the stage and opened the world's eyes to what was happening outside of MTV. He created a zine in the late 90s that wasn't focused on band reviews, or show reviews, or root beer reviews, shout out to Annoying Scene. Instead, he created short stories with a punk rock tone hidden in the background and called it Just in Time for Nothing. I remember buying copies of his zine back in the day, and what I loved about it was that I couldn't tell if they were fiction or nonfiction or autobiographical, but they were just really creative stories, and it was almost as if he was a band without a band. He was a lyricist without melody, without music in the background, and he just had a great way to put words together and just hit these solid emotional points in people. I thought it would be a great idea to get him to talk about it because he was also huge into the punk scene before it became a thing locally and, and nationwide. He was a huge Descendants fan, and he grew up listening to all these bands, and he's just got this like fucking Wikipedia brain of knowledge about bands because he's still so passionate about it. And I think this is such a great interview because of that. And I asked him, if he'd be down to talk, and he said certainly. So in this interview, we discussed Yabo's room in Gleaming the Cube, the Descendants, his accidental conversation with Jay Bentley from Bad Religion, the famous photo of him holding the Ernie doll on the back of Green Day's Dookie album, the hardcore band Uprise, how he started his zine, DJing shows in the city. I tried to talk him into finally publishing a book, and a shit ton more. As I had mentioned in last week's episode, Robert Muscatello from the little band LWL, who is a staple in the NJ scene, works for a company called Southern Tier Brewing. Well, this week's episode is sponsored by Southern Tier Distilling Company, which is a subsidiary of Southern Tier Brewing. The founder, Finn Demick, God, I hope I said that right, has turned his sights to the art of distilling. Founded in 2015 and production starting the summer of 2016, Southern Tier Distilling Company broke onto the scene in Western New York. Building on 300 plus years of Western New York spirit production, Southern Tier Distilling Company puts the heritage into every bottle. Now expanding their market to New Jersey, Delaware, and Ohio, more of us can enjoy these premium spirits, such as Southern Tier Distilling Company's straight bourbon, silver medal award-winning vodka, smoked bourbon, and their 2X hopped whiskey, a whiskey distilled from their gold medal winning 2X IPA. In addition to their spirits, also available are Southern Tier Distilling Company's premium canned cocktails. Soon to hit the market are the gin and tonic with elderflower and cucumber, the bourbon smash with ginger, mint, and lime, and the vodka madras with cranberry, orange, and chamomile. Great for camping, the beach, tailgating, and of course golf. Should probably add a cigar with that as well. Great things on the horizon for all things Southern Tier. Check out Southern Tier Distilling at stdcspirits.com and follow Rob at southern_tier_NJ on Instagram. Southern Tier, why the hell not? This episode is also brought to you by my new book, I'll Eventually Like Kids When They're Older. I started drawing a comic on my Instagram back in November of 2017, and this is a collaboration of a few of them, like 86 of them. You can find the book on Amazon, or you can go to yourdailybread.com. That's B-R-E-D, not B-R-E-A-D. That's not confusing. It's a great gift for friends, for yourself, a coffee table book, a bathroom book, a book. Here's one of my 5-star reviews, in case you're wondering. Still great even if you're not a parent who loves your kids. Hilarity and relatable life observations. Come to think of it, if Seinfeld had a daily Instagram comic, it might be this. Yes, those are actual words from a review. As always, thank you to the people who have donated to the podcast. If you'd like to do so as well, just go to thiswasthescene.com and send whatever you'd like. Again, it just helps me keep this thing alive. I also have merch on the website that you can buy, and I just added stickers, but it is a limited run, so you might want to act fast. Feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who you know would love some nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. Anyone listening, this is Brian Molloy. Brian, say hello.
Hello.
Where are you at these days?
I am down the shore in New Jersey, live in the Jersey Shore. I didn't grow up there, though. I grew up in Essex County, but now I'm relocated
Where in Essex
to Central
County?
Jersey.
Where in Essex County were you?
I grew up in West Orange.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, how far were you from the Legion Hall?
Maybe like a 5-minute drive.
Oh, no shit. So was that that's like what's that exit off of 280?
That's exit it's 145 off the Parkway,
Yeah.
and it's like exit 7 or 8. There's a couple in West Orange.
Oh my God, it's amazing. So this interview, a lot of interviews that I've done so far have been bands and music studios, and I did another zine, but this is a zine that wasn't really a zine. It was more, how would you say it, like short stories?
Yeah, they were short stories. Literary zine, I used to refer to it as.
Yeah, it was kind of like your outlet of, writing. So I'm gonna jump into that later, but as in every interview, and I say this every time, so Brian was big into the scene, I would say. I used to see you all the time, and usually, I think I saw you, the times I really recognized you at shows is when you had your zine with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we start talking. But to go back to what got you going there, what bands got you into music?
What bands got me into music? Well, I grew up in a house that was very into music. My brothers were a big influence on me. It was the early 80s. I'm 42, so I was born in 75.
Okay.
So when I was in elementary school, MTV was just starting. So I was exposed to a lot of new wave bands like Tears for Fears, Duran Duran, Haircut 100, stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
Actually, Tears for Fears was the first band I saw in concert in 85. I was 10.
Really?
When I saw them, yeah.
Where was this?
That was at Radio City Music Hall.
Oh, my God.
So that was when they were on tour for Songs from the Big Chair. So Everybody Wants to Rule the World Shout. And then when I got to junior high, for 1 year, for 7th grade, I got into rap. The Beastie Boys were the big band at the time. And I went to see them with Run DMC at Madison Square Garden in 87.
Who was taking you to these shows?
My brother took me to the Tears for Fears show, and my friend him and his cousin took me to the Run DMC show. It's funny. I was recently reading Harley Flanagan from the Cro-Mags, his autobiography.
Yeah.
And they mentioned that Run DMC show, and I believe he said something about how there was all this sort of anticipated gang violence or something at that show. And I remember being seated by the usher and her saying to me, "We'll keep an eye on you to make sure you're safe." And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Why would I be in it? And I guess there was like a lot of trouble they were expecting that night, but there was no trouble at all. I didn't see anything. I think a guy who was selling bootleg shirts got robbed afterwards by some kids outside the place, but that's all I remember. Looking back, I'm surprised my mother let me go, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I went. The first, I guess, the next year in 8th grade, I kind of went through a real sort of rebellious period in my life. 7th grade was a particularly bad year for me.
Why?
And the coming out of that, just home life. My father was real sick, and just a lot of bad stuff going on domestically.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I got into the summer between 7th and 8th grade. I started smoking cigarettes, grew a mullet, and started listening to Metallica. Just kind of textbook metal phase that I went through. And I started getting in trouble at school. And I guess the reason I mention this is because I got into punk rock through that, where, of course, I was at first into like Metallica, Megadeth, and Anthrax. Then that led to like Suicidal Tendencies and DRI, which their early stuff was more hardcore. So that exposed me to that. And also Megadeth and Anthrax had covered Sex Pistols songs. Mm-hmm. So I had to go out and buy the Sex Pistols album. And halfway through my freshman year, I got into some trouble at school again. I was getting into trouble a lot. I kind of made some changes in my life. And right around that time, as I was looking kind of for not a new identity, I wasn't like saying, I'm going to find a new identity. I just wanted to kind of get myself straightened out because I didn't want to get in trouble anymore. I was kind of like pressing the reset button on my life. I saw a movie called Gleaming the Cube with Christian Slater on HBO,
Yep.
The skateboarding movie.
Yeah.
And there is a song in it where Christian and his friend are in the kid's room, and it's like a bomb shelter or something in the backyard.
Eyeball? What was this, like Oball?
Yeah. Yabo or something.
Yeah,
I think it was
Yabo.
something strange.
I'm gonna
right?
Google this. Yeah, go on.
He's in the kid who's in that. He's also in the MC Hammer Bust a Move video, but I've never seen him in anything else. I don't really know what his story was, because he was one of the only ones, I think, besides Christian Slater, that wasn't a professional skater in the movie, right? Because like Tony Hawk was in it and Guerrero and everybody. So
Yabo.
anyway,
Yabo. Yes.
Yabo.
Okay.
If you're out there, Yabo, your room in that scene changed my life.
Dude,
because
no
you were
shit.
playing
That
a song.
Yeah, go on.
It was just a snippet of one song, and I was like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard. I had no idea what it was. So I went up to the Livingston Mall, and I think I asked some skaters up there. I was like, hey, Gleaming the Cube, what's the song they're playing in that kid's room? And the kid was like, oh, I don't know. I think it's like The Descendants. And I knew who the Circle Jerks were at this time, because Chris Poland from Megadeth was in the Circle Jerks briefly. And I'd always meant to pick up something by them. So I thought, all right, well, why don't I buy like a Circle Jerks and a Descendants record? Maybe it's these people. And I'd seen the Descendants record, Hallraker, the live album, before, because it kind of looks like a DRI record, the little logo on the front of it with the caution guy. And it was also, the band begins with the letter D, so it was right by DRI. Mm-hmm. So I always thought that looked like a cool album. So I decided to buy Hallraker by the Descendants, and I bought Wild in the Streets by the Circle Jerks, and my life completely changed. I was like, these are the two best records I've ever heard in my life. That's it. No more metal for me. It is strictly punk rock. And
why though? What was it about those records? Like, where did it take you? Like, was it the music? Was it the lyrics? Like, what was it?
With the Circle Jerks, it was the lyrics, the music, and what they looked like. And this is before Keith Morris had the long dreadlocks. So on the album, they all had short hair, which I had at the time. And I thought, wow, these four guys look like regular guys like me. They didn't look like, rock stars putting on some kind of pose. They were just normal kids. And the lyrics, it dealt with like politics, kind of people bothering them, just kind of regular problems a guy like me was facing this is in the winter of 1990. So I really identified with that. The Descendants, on the other hand, which is funny because I really didn't know what the Descendants looked like for another year, because I was only getting cassettes and there were like no pictures of them. That little picture on Liveage was the only thing I could see what they looked like. I just assumed Milo had glasses from the cover of Milo Goes to College. And the lyrics to, I think there's a song on All where he talks about his throwing his glasses away. So I wasn't sold on the image of Milo before I got in the Descendants. I didn't even know what he looked like. So it wasn't even like, here's this guy with these glasses and his whole kind of nerd image. That I didn't find out about that till later. But that Descendants record, it was the songs about like rejection, liking a girl, her not liking you, not fitting in. I mean, Hallraker has songs like My World about not fitting in, Pep Talk about when the girl you like doesn't like you and how you got to kind of carry on. Jealous of the World Again, which I was jealous of. The greatest line, I hate you because I hate me, right? It's pretty funny. But, it was just amazing. I mean, the music was just so powerful and great that I was like, this is what I'm into. And oddly enough, right around that time, I got into the Ramones too. I caught a video on MTV, and I always knew who they were, but that also kind of blew up right around the same time. I did eventually find out that Stukas Over Disneyland was the Dickies, who is a band I love and one of my favorite bands to this day. So I actually got it in my head. I said, why don't I watch the credits of the film? And then I was able to catch it. I VCR taped it and was able to see that. And that pretty much set me on the punk rock way. It's funny. I was thinking, too, when you asked me to do this, that we were talking just before about Skype and everything, that back then without the internet, it was a real chore getting into this music.
Yeah.
I had to look at like the SST Records catalog, the Cruise Records catalog, read the liner notes of the albums, dissect the thank you list, because I knew that the Descendants had become All, which became one of my favorite bands, especially with Scott Reynolds singing, and Dave Smalley too. They're probably my favorite band to this day. And I had looked and saw that they were friends with this band, the Chemical People, that I really liked. And I would go through the Chemical People's thank you list, and I was like, okay, I got to get Big Drill Car, the Doughboys, the Hard-Ons, all these bands that I never would have heard of if they didn't thank them on the record. That was like Wikipedia for 1991.
Yeah.
So, and it was crazy. I'll tell you, the cool thing about that was I remember going to a battle of the bands at my high school, and I was wearing maybe, who knows what shirt I had on. It could have been anything. And this guy started talking to me about punk rock. He was from another town, maybe Cedar Grove or something. And he was like, "Oh, you like the Circle Jerks? Have you heard Bad Religion?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, Greg Hetson's in Bad Religion." So I immediately ran out and bought the Bad Religion record, Against the Grain, which is, to me, a masterpiece, one of the best albums ever. And then I got the Epitaph catalog, and at the time there was only like 10 albums on Epitaph, and I called them because I had a question. I wanted to order a record from them, and I ended up talking to Jay Bentley on the phone from Bad Religion. I'm like 15, and I couldn't believe I'm talking to the guy on the phone. And
wait, how did you do that?
Well, what happened was I got the mail order catalog, and they were going to release 8085, the Bad Religion CD that had How Could Hell Be Any Worse on it.
Yep.
And I didn't know if it was out yet. So I just called the number like in the phone book for Epitaph. I just wanted to ask them. So I called, and I'm talking to this guy on the phone, and I said, "Oh, are Bad Religion going to tour soon?" And he said, "Oh, well, we're going to tour Europe, and then we're going to do this." I'm like, "What do you mean we?" And he's like, "Oh, this is Jay Bentley." And I'm like, "You're kidding." And I spent like 2 hours on the phone with him, and he's like, he told me who Dag Nasty were, to go out and check them out, because Dave Smalley from All and Down by Law was in that band, and I had never heard of them. And that was funny because I remember walking up to like Record World in Essex Green and West Orange and buying Wig Out at Denko's by Dag Nasty and opening it up, and Dave Smalley wasn't the singer, and I was like, oh no, because back then it was like you got money on the weekend. And, there was no iTunes. You couldn't listen to the album before you bought it. You took a gamble every time you bought a record. And I was like, who's this guy? Peter Kortner. Who's he? I wanted Dave Smalley. And then I look over and I see that Doug Karen from The Descendants is playing bass. And I'm like, but wait a minute, the guy from The Descendants is on it. And then, of course, that album is one of my favorite albums. And Peter's a good guy. And I love the stuff with him and Dave equally. So it all worked out in the end. But that was how, just weird ways I got into stuff. Funny enough, everyone seems to know Dag Nasty from Brian Baker from Minor Threat, and I didn't even listen to Minor Threat yet at the time because there was no way to sort of get all the information the way there is today. And I just have to say to all the guys and kids out there today getting into punk rock, look it up, man. The work's done for you. Just go get into good music. That's all waiting for you.
I'm starting to see that this podcast has almost become a way for like a thank you list, in a sense, where there's a lot of bands where they'll be mentioned in these interviews and everyone will go back. So they'll be listening, and they're on their computer, they'll be Googling certain bands. So I'm sure like this, the amount of bands that you just talked about in this first 13 minutes has been, there's such a great list. And I'm sure this is going to get people to go back and listen to these bands.
Well, I hope so, because I always have this thing in the back of my head where I either want to put out another zine or even a book about that sort of late 80s, very early 90s pop punk scene with like all Chemical People, Big Drill Car, Doughboys, Hard-Ons stuff. Yeah. Because it's not, I mean, people know who All are, but the other bands kind of get overlooked. And I mean, they used to play out here all the time. And this was all, pre-Dookie, Green Day stuff. And it meant a lot to me. And really, it's more for me. I even if I'm the only one that reads it, I don't care. But it's just something. It was just such a special time in my life. And if I look back at it, and you were like, those bands I just mentioned, if you said, Brian, put on a concert today, pick 5 bands, like those are the bands that are going to play. And I've listened to a lot of music, a lot of different types of stuff. And
who would headline if you did that show?
Oh, all with Scott singing.
Okay.
I've seen if it's going to be the Descendants, they got to get Tony Lombardo out here and do the Milo album like they did in Chicago. Like I need something special. I've seen them with Scott, but that would be my band. But I could have 2 shows. I don't know. See
how did you listen to music back then? Because you were 10 at the time when this happened.
No, I was 14.
Okay.
When that started.
So you're 14. You don't have a license, especially because back then in Jersey, I think it was 18 to get your license. Or it was, so you had like
17.
It was 17. Yeah. So yeah, actually right, because you and me are around the same age. So I was around 17 when I got mine. But like, how would you listen to music? Would you go in your brother's room and use his cassette player? Did you have your own in your room? Like, what was that like when you'd get home from school and like, I got to throw this fucking record on?
Oh, I had a boom box with a tape and a CD.
Oh my God, it's amazing. I
didn't have much growing up in terms of gadgets and high tech stuff. We were pretty late in the game with things, but I always had some kind of boom box. It's funny because people used to see me around town, even back in the 5th grade. I'd always be walking with my boom box. It was like Tears for Fears, then it was Run DMC, then Metallica, then Suicidal, then the Descendants. And I'll tell you, this summer, if you're free in the morning, go to the Asbury Park Boardwalk. You'll see me walking my son in a stroller with my little Bose speaker playing music as we walk every morning up and down the Jersey shoreline. So
Oh my God,
nothing's really changed. You know?
It's so cool seeing all these punk rock parents. We played a show a couple weeks ago, a reunion show, and there's all these kids there with these like giant like earmuffs on. So they're but it was just like they got to be there and witness this. The scene, definitely the one that you grew up with is a lot more of like the original punk, and then the ones that I got into was more like the pop punk, the after Dookie generation. Who dabbled into that. But to see these kids see that now, but it was like they were seeing not what's happening now, but what was happening back then in a now setting. But it's cool to me that your son is like, you're just going down Asbury just blasting this and like, yeah, like he's gonna grow up and probably like fucking worship these bands.
Yeah, I hope so. I keep it a little. It might not necessarily be some punk rock I'm playing, but it's all over. It's all over the place with him. Yeah, he's only 9 months old, so I can't.
But I think it's like it kind of builds in the subconscious. I mean, I can go back and remember like my mom playing Michael Jackson records and and all that shit when I was growing up. And every time the song comes on, it brings you back to thinking of when I was that little, listening to it, and like my old house and what that was like.
The interesting thing, because you just mentioned Dookie, is that that really, I guess I should say that really was like a weird kind of line in the sand, because I don't know if you know this. You know that I'm on the back cover of that album, right?
Yeah, you are the one holding the Ernie doll.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned that recently, because two of my friends I can say, Steve Raguso, who was in Six Felter Place, him and this other, I fucking forget her name, but I remember in art class, they came in before Dookie was released, and they said, hey, we're on the back of this Green Day cover. And,
oh, really?
Yeah, so they're right behind you, because they said, oh, look, there's a camera, they're taking a picture of that Ernie doll, let's run up there. So their heads, the top of their heads are in it.
Well, the funny story is about that, if you don't mind, I
Absolutely
can drop that story, is that was taken when they opened. I saw Green Day actually in January of '93 at City Gardens, and I had only owned the 1,000 Hour single.
Yeah.
And it was one of the best shows I've ever seen. I couldn't believe how good they were. Me and my friend just went at the last minute, and I got really into them. That was my senior year of high school, and that following autumn, they played with Bad Religion at the Roseland Ballroom, and on the way to the show, my friend had stolen an Ernie puppet from a comic book store somewhere, to be honest. Or I think the guy that worked there let him take it. I wouldn't say he actually stole it. I don't want to implicate him. But he... I'm
sure the statute of limitations might be...
I think it's over. The place is closed down. It's long gone. Jim Henson's even passed away at this point, so I think we're okay.
Yeah.
So we're driving to the show, and in the car, whatever we were listening to, I was singing along with the puppet, and my friend was like, literally said to me, Bri, if you bring that in, I bet a bunch of girls will start talking to you. So I was like, oh, absolutely, let's bring it inside. So I went up to the front, and I was singing along with it, and a lot of people that were in the area next to me were getting really mad at me, like they thought it was stupid or annoying. And I saw Billy Joe cracking up on stage, like he obviously thought it was funny. And I remember at one point he was like, come on, we're in New York, heckle us. And I yelled, you effing sellouts, like just joking. And this girl started screaming at me, like, what are you doing here if you think they're sellouts? And I'm like, didn't you just hear what he said? Like, it was just, totally, obviously I was into them because I'm with the puppet. I know every lyric to every song, and so does, obviously. But it was just, everyone seemed really annoyed by it. And then I guess at the end of it, it wasn't such a bad thing because they can all see themselves on the back of the record, and all you can see is part of my face because my hand is blocking the half of my face from holding the puppet up. But what was really funny was that years later, I remember being somewhere and looking at the album. I remember my friend John, this guy John I went to school with up at Morris County College, called me and said, he worked at the record store at Ledgewood Mall. And he's like, you're on the back of the Green Day record. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I ran down to Let It Rock, and I picked it up on vinyl, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And I thought my life was going to change, to be honest with you, because when I was a kid, I used to look at the back of my brother's Kiss Alive record, and there was a picture of these kids holding up a Kiss banner, and I was like, oh, they're so cool. They got to be on the back of the Kiss record. Now I'm on the back of the Green Day record, and nothing really interesting ever happened, except this story I thought was kind of funny. They ended up, what I was saying before was, I ended up looking at the record in like the mid 90s or something in a store, and I couldn't see myself on the cover, the back cover. It was like I was gone. And I'm going, where the hell am I? And my friend came over and he said, no, dude, they turned you into a girl. Look, that's you. And I look, and they cut the puppet out of the back of the cover, and half of my face got cut off, and they photoshopped a face on me. So if you look right in the center of the album now, there's a picture of a girl that looks like Phantom of the Opera, the musical, where the guy has half a mask on.
Yeah.
And that's me as a girl. And I was like, what the hell's that all about? So anyway, years later, it's like 2004. I'm walking out of this bar in New York called Niagara on Avenue A.
Okay.
And I'm with the same guy whose puppet that was, by the way. My friend, here we are, years later, we're stumbling out of this bar, and he's like, dude, there's Billy Joe from Green Day. And he's standing outside, and I go over to him and I said, hi, I'm Brian Molloy. I'm on the back cover of your album. And he's like, oh, Brian, nice to meet you. And he starts talking to me, and I said, well, what happened? And he said, oh, we got a cease and desist order from Jim Henson's estate. A parent bought it and thought it was a kid's record, but don't worry, there's 1 million out there with you on it. And I said, that's really funny. So we're walking away, and I turned to my friend Chris, and I said, that's really weird that he just took my word that it was me. And we just kind of laughed about it and went about our business. About a month later, I'm at another bar, and this girl I was hanging out with noticed that Trey Cool was on the other side of the bar. And I said, oh, hold on a second. And I go over and I tell him who I am. He comes over, he introduced himself to her, and we're talking. And he's like, oh, I love this guy, Brian. He's on the back cover of our record. And I'm like, how does he take my word for this?
Holy shit.
Well, this is what I found out. So fast forward to like 2007. My friends, Mike and Gerard, they're in that band My Chemical Romance, which I guess they're broken up now. I actually just ran into them, oddly enough, on the street the other day down in Bloomfield. It was really weird.
That's amazing.
Very, very weird. I pulled my car over. I hadn't seen them in years. Actually, this was the last conversation that I'm about to tell you about that I had with Mike in 2007. He called me up one day, and we were talking. And he's like, oh, we played a bunch of shows with Green Day, and I told them all about you and how you're on the back cover of the record and everything. And I was like, holy shit, they actually did know who I was.
Wow.
Yeah, I was like, that's really strange. But if anyone's wondering, I never received any kind of payment or any celebrity status or anything from it. It's just a funny story that I could pass on to my son someday.
Dude, that's one of my favorite. I love all the stories, and that's one of my favorite fucking stories so far on this fucking podcast. Because so I'm looking at it online, and I was looking at the Google image, and there's the one with Ernie, and it's like your hands up, and your head is just kind of right in front of where you see your left eye and your mouth, and then below it, it's literally they photoshopped a girl's face as, like, you're right, the Phantom of the Opera on the right side of your head.
Yeah.
And it's like literally the early pressing of Green Day's album Dookie had Ernie and Sesame Street on the back crowd surfing. Subsequent pressing of the 16-time platinum Dookie, they had to airbrush him out for fear of litigation from Jim Henson Company. That's fucking nuts, dude. That's crazy because this is why this is fucking weird, because the time this record came out, we were 9th graders in high school. And in that art class was my first period class, and I think it was really soon into that class they told me this story. I had no idea who Green Day was. I had no idea like what punk rock was at all. So when that came out, I remember them coming in and then showing the record and said, "Look, there we are on the back of the CD." I'm like, "Oh, that's really cool. That's awesome." They're like, "Yeah, there's our heads." So they're right in front of you. It's like in the front of the album. There's a redheaded girl, and then this kid with black hair, and that's Steve. And they told me that. So that was before I got into punk rock. So the fact that was my first introduction to it, besides like listening to Joe and Jet and shit when I was a kid on my sister's 7 inches, like that was my introduction to this music scene. And that's weird that you're the fucking dude who's Ernie. That's so
very
crazy.
Strange. It's weird because like 2 weeks or so after that show, the Descendants did a reunion at City Gardens. And it was funny because in the City Gardens book, I can see myself right in the center of the crowd, right by the stage at like Milo's feet. And I had the puppet that night, but I was so psyched that the Descendants were playing because I'd never seen them before that the puppet stayed in the bag. So it could have ended up in that picture too.
Oh my God. What'd you do with the puppet? What happened to Ernie?
It went through it was in my house for a long time, and then it ended up back with my friend, and maybe he has it. He lives out in Big Sur now, so maybe he has it. One of the other things about that puppet, if you look closely at it, there's an X on the Ernie doll's hand. I was straight edge at the time, and I X'd the Ernie doll up before we went in there. So
you can
there's
see
a little distinguishing characteristic in case any imposters try to come and steal my thunder. Ernie had the edge, I guess. So it's floating around somewhere. We thought about putting it on eBay and trying to divvy up the money, but I don't even know where it is.
You would make a shit ton of money on that.
There's a fucking. I'll reach out to him. We'll see. We'll see if he still has it.
There's a fan art on this website Creators of literally just the Ernie doll, and it's like it's a recreation of the back of the cover, but like the kids in it are like zombies, but Ernie's just sticking up in the middle.
Wait, are you serious? Really?
Yeah, I'll send you a link to it. Let me.
Wow, cool. That's interesting.
Yeah, I'll send you a link through.
That's
Facebook
funny.
Right now. Hold on, let me do that as we're talking.
Yeah. So that was really like a line because see at that point, and I have to say that like when punk rock started to get kind of popular at that point with Green Day and the Offspring and everything, I started to get kind of bitter at that point because I was like, a lot, the high school I went to was not very accepting of the punk rocker. It was the kind of school where if you dyed your hair blue, you'd probably be beaten up before first period.
Oh, yeah.
It was kind of like a pre kind of even Nirvana scene there. It was just a lot of guys, if you weren't into like Vanilla Ice and MC Hammer, you were doomed. And as punk rock got more popular, I guess I became more insecure because look, I'll be honest. I don't know what I would have done without this music if I would have even made it through high school alive or without a serious drug problem. I don't know what I would have done, but so I was always very. It was a weird relationship moving forward. I still liked bands, I still liked music, I still went to shows, but at that point I started getting back into like new wave bands and Britpop was the thing at the time, and I started listening to stuff like Pulp and Blur, and I got really interested in that music, and I ended up being a DJ later on in New York playing that music at clubs and bars, but I still was involved in punk rock. And I think it's funny because if you look at the first 4 issues of Just in Time for Nothing, I don't really mention that many punk rock bands in the stories, but it's funny because I never put out issue number 5, which is laid out and done. And that was supposed to be a whole storyline that was going to take up about 10 issues based on my experiences in high school. So like, that's probably why if some people read it and they're like, oh, this doesn't seem like there's that much punk rock stuff. He doesn't really mention that much stuff outside of like the Buzzcocks and the Jam. That's probably the reason why.
Yeah. So the scene transitions, Green Day comes out, you become, multimillionaire off your royalties. And, if I had, I probably would have been nicer and I would have been less cranky, I guess. If Green Day paid me, I would have been like, sure, bring it on. I'll tell you, mate, you should find that fucking doll and sell it on eBay. I bet you'd make a shit ton of money. So how did you transition then? So because the local scene was starting to come around and about like where it really started to get a lot of focus was like 97, 98 where the shows are getting bigger. So how did you go from being, like you said, kind of bitter and then like just going to those local shows? Because the initial shows you're going to, they're all in the city or they're at big venues in Jersey or the city. So when you started going locally, like where did you go? Like, do you remember the first show that you went to? You're kind of like, well, let me check this out.
Well, the as far as going, like a lot of the shows I went to were at City Gardens, Maxwell's, the Ritz in New York early on. And then I got into, right around the time I was a senior, I got really into being straight edge for a little while. I was straight edge, so I was 26 actually. And I started going to see local straight edge bands in Jersey. And that's when I started going to shows at like Middlesex County College and VFW halls and stuff. So I was already familiar with the sort of DIY shows as opposed to the ones that were in these venues that were a little bigger. I also spent 96. So that was like 90. When did the Dookie come out? In 94, right?
Yeah.
So in 95, 96, I was the stage manager for Elvez, the Mexican Elvis.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know if I ever mentioned that to you. He was in an old punk rock band called the Zeros back in the late 70s. They were kind of billed as the Mexican Ramones. They got a couple really good records from back then. I met him at one of his shows at Maxwell's, and I ended up getting him in and out of his costumes and performing on stage with him and selling his merchandise and all this stuff. So that kind of distracted me for a while. I went to Europe with him and did a bunch of stuff. And then when that ended and I went back to school, that was right around the time I decided to do Just in Time for Nothing in 97.
Okay.
And I also was in a hardcore band at that time. And I think we played one of our only shows with you guys, right? You were in Congress of Cow, right?
Yep.
there was a show with Weston at the Booton,
Yep.
right? In Booton.
Yeah.
We were the first band that
You were the
played that
openers.
show.
Holy shit,
we were
that's
the
right.
openers. Yeah.
Oh my God, what was the name of the band?
All Things Considered.
Yes.
Yeah, it was me and Matt and Frank from Uprise. They were later in Dead Nation. And Brian Sheffield, who's a photographer who took a lot of the pictures of Just in Time for Nothing. His brother Rob was our drummer.
So super funny you mentioned Uprise, because going back to real quick how you had blue hair, wearing punk shirts back in high school and getting made fun of. So Mike Ziobro, who was the guitar player in Uprise,
he played with us for a little while too. Yeah.
Yeah, he graduated in my class in Jefferson. So we were in the same class, and he came to school in like middle school with Fugazi shirts on, and he got ripped on because everyone thought he was a skinhead Nazi because it said Fugazi, and they were like, oh, that means he's like and he shaved his head or something, so we're like, oh man, he's a fucking skinhead. So he used to get so much shit on, but he was always the kid that knew about every fucking band about 2-3 years before we even got into them. But that's funny because that connects that you knew him and you played in a bunch of bands.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
that
crazy.
was it. I think that's when I met the guys in Humble Beginnings. I think, if I'm not mistaken, me and the guys in the band, we were at a stoplight somewhere, and my car, which is on the cover of Just in Time for Nothing #2, I had all stickers on the back, like Descendants and the Smiths and the Specials and all this stuff were on the back of the car I had at the time. And I think one of the guys in Humble Beginnings jumped out of their car and threw a flyer for the show in Booton into my window that was open. And then we pulled up to the next light and we're like, no, we're playing with you guys. It's cool. We're on awesome. That was like a couple weeks before that. And so I think at that show, the Booton Elks show, was when I really there was another show I saw with that was in West Orange, right around the corner from my house, maybe before that, with like Felix Frump and some other bands played. So I knew there was like this sort of like pop punk scene that was coming out. I was also friends with Alan Rappaport, who worked at Flip Side. So I'd go up there and he would tell me about stuff. But I think it was that Booton show that made me say, wow, look at this scene. I mean, it was weird because I was like listening to stuff like Pulp at the time and kind of getting into that stuff. And then still going to like hardcore shows, touring with Elvez, and then going to these. I was kind of all over the place. Like there were so many different things going on in the 90s, I guess, that I was into. But I liked going, and I liked the kids, and I thought it was really great. I mean, in looking back on it, I appreciated a lot that there was this scene that you guys had that was big, and there were shows all the time. And I was like 22 years old, so I would go to a show like in Lyndhurst. And then I'd leave and go to Aldo's, this like new wave club down the street, and be there. It was like I was living like two different lives. It was so weird. I was just thinking about this the other day. Like there was just so much to do at the time.
Oh my God.
And just meeting so many different people was great. I could just go to like Rockaway Mall and I'd always run into somebody from somewhere. So.
Oh, we were always there. We were always.
Yeah.
I think I ran into you so many times there because we'd be walking around, going to get, the free sample at that Japanese restaurant in the food court. Yeah. And actually, I was like walking around. I was getting like sneakers yesterday. And I was in the mall down here, and first of all, I was like, why am I here? I'm 39. And then the other one was like, I walked by the Japanese place. I was like, oh man, I wonder if they have fucking free samples like the place in Rockaway. And they didn't, which I thought was bad marketing. But
that's a drag.
But we would always hang out in front of the Hot Topic because it was kind of like, oh, this place sucks, but this is the only place close by, instead of driving to Flipside to get records, that we could be here in like 10 minutes from Jefferson. And we always hang out there. And I think I remember a bunch of times I was running into you walking around and bullshitting. I mean, it's very vague, but I can remember.
By that time, I was so much more accepting because, like, I'll tell you honestly, like around 94, like some of the kids that were a little younger than me in high school started to get into punk, and I was like a dick. Like I really was just very. It was like I was protecting something for life. And I'm like, who are you guys? And what do you want? And I look back and I think I ran into some of these guys at an all show in like 92. And I apologized to them. I was like, I'm sorry. I was such a jerk, man. You got to understand, like, this was it. And I didn't know what was happening.
I always thought you were like one of the nicest people. Every time we talked, you were always so friendly. And even after the scene, I mean, obviously it was way past of you being, upset and angry as a young guy.
Yeah.
Last time I saw you was in Hoboken when you were DJing.
Oh, Louise and Jerry's?
Yeah. No. It was you were DJing at on like First Street. There was a bar there that you were in the
Mulligan's?
back DJing. Mulligan's. Yeah, this was like 2008 or 2009 or something like that.
It had to be 2000. It was before then. because.
Or you were just there because someone was DJing, but you and I ran. It was us living in Hoboken time.
I haven't. I was the last time I was at Mulligan's was September 15th, 2007.
Jesus Christ, dude. That's when I was there. That was like, because I had just fucking moved to Hoboken in June, and that's where we ran into each other. Jesus Christ, that's crazy. All right, so let's talk about. I love everything that you just fucking talked about. By the way, that was fantastic storytelling.
Sure.
Obviously, that kind of transitions into this because you are a storyteller, and you definitely were in the zine. So, what got you into writing your zine?
When I didn't read a lot when I was in high school as a kid and stuff. I was more of a guy that just sat around and watched television. And when I got to college, I went to Morris County College for a very long period of time, longer than anyone should ever be in that school. But it was kind of like a hangout, actually. A lot of different people went to school there. Like Jake from the Casualties went to school there, and then like some other people. And I left for like 2 years, then came back, and eventually I had to pack it in and go somewhere else to finish because it was bad. But my second semester at Morris County College, I took a creative writing class, and right before that class started, I was just kind of messing around in the library, looking around, and I saw a book by an author named Charles Bukowski. And here we go, full circle, back to the Chemical People and their records. In the Chemical People album, The Right Thing, there's a quote by Charles Bukowski. It says something like, she is dark, she's dreaming about God, I am God. And that always stuck with me. And I saw that. I said, oh, this is the guy the Chemical People quoted. I got to check this out. And I took the book out. And it was a bunch of poems that were kind of written in prose, these little snippets of this guy who was an alcoholic. And he's got 1 million books out and everything. And even though I didn't drink at the time, I really identified with it. And I thought it was like, I couldn't believe you could write like that. It was almost like punk rock, but literature.
Yeah.
So I started reading his stuff a lot. And then I started reading a lot of Bret Easton Ellis, who wrote Less Than Zero and American Psycho. And I liked that stuff a lot. And
what was it about? Was it just because it was so raw and just like,
I think it was just the fact that you could kind of be so honest with it, where a lot of literature I was presented with as a kid was just boring. It was just like, here's this really boring story about boring people and lots of 50-cent words that I got to keep looking up in the dictionary, and now I feel dumb and everything. And like, so reading this was just, it was like a punk rock record in my hand. And I don't know what it was with the Bret Easton Ellis stuff that attracted me, because I certainly wasn't rich, and I certainly wasn't on drugs, and I certainly wasn't involved in all the sexual escapades these kids were in, but something just made it interesting. And I guess maybe because the fact that you could actually do this and a store would sell it made it interesting to me.
Interesting.
So I started writing stories for this class, and a lot of them were just, kind of throwaway things. And I wrote one story that just kind of changed my whole direction. I've never actually released this story. It's actually this will sound weird. It's actually one of the chapters in my second book, which doesn't make sense because I never released the first one. So we'll just leave it at that. There's a lot of unfinished work here.
Very mysterious.
if it ever comes out, I'll let the world know.
Well, what's keeping you? I don't want to jump too far, but what keeps you from putting it out?
Oh, I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
I'll tell you.
All right. You guide me, man.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I just kept writing it, and my friends seemed to like it. And they used to have these open mic readings in Montclair, New Jersey, called La Di Da. They would do like acoustic guitar stuff and poetry readings. And I'd go and read some of my stories, and people seemed to like them. And I thought, okay, maybe this is something I could do. And I started writing a lot. And it was just, that was my thing. If I wasn't at a show, I was at home eating Tostitos and drinking Pathmark Birch beer and typing away on my word processor and listening to whatever, I guess at the time I was really into Squeeze, the new wave band at the time.
Okay.
I probably really liked them.
Was that Pulling Muscles from a Shell, that band?
Yeah. A lot of their early stuff is really, really interesting. It was foreshadowing my life as a barfly, which would come later.
Okay.
But so I started writing these stories, and my friend Eric, I guess he might have mentioned to me like, oh, you should maybe try to put a book out, a short story, like a chapbook. And I was like, oh, that would be great. And I was like looking into it, but at the time it's like 1996 and I don't even own a computer. I didn't even get the internet till like 2000. So
how were you writing your stories? Was it all pen and paper?
A word processor with a monitor that I got at Caldor's.
Yes. Okay.
So I'm typing these things up, and at one point we decided that it would just be too expensive to do a book. So why don't we just do like a zine? And he helped me out with them. He actually typed them all up on his Mac up in Boston. He was living up there, and would fax or send them back to me. And then I'd cut them up and lay them out and everything. And
yeah, what was the process of that? Like, what was like the technical process of you doing it? So he typed it up and you just like, did you just print them out? Like, how did that go?
He typed up the issues just like into the 2 columns on each page.
Yep.
And then I would take the originals, or I'd photocopy them, so I had an extra one, and then I would cut them down and then glue stick them to other pieces of paper. Like,
oh my God.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like really old really real.
But laying out
basic.
a book is a bitch, because you have to realize, like, let's say you staple it in the middle, page, the cover and the back are the first page, and then page 1 and the last page or the next page. So you have to lay it out knowing that. Did you have to do it like that eventually? Because you're sort of stapled together. Okay.
Yeah. I got a big stapler at the Staples, and I would sit in my room, and I used to have to I wore like cut off gloves because my hands would hurt from folding them. And just sit there and fold them and staple them.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really rudimentary. And so there was that. And I guess I should say how I got the name of the zine, Just in Time for Nothing. My friend Chris Fenton, who was the guy that had the Ernie puppet, one day I picked him up on like a Wednesday afternoon, and we went driving around West Orange, and we were trying to find something to do, and there was nothing to do. And I'm like, look, I'm just going to go home. He's like, all right, forget it. Let's go. And I just was about to drop him off. And he's like, what time is it? And I looked at the clock, and I was like, I don't know, like 3:15. He goes, oh, good, just in time. And there was like a pause, and he goes, for nothing. And I was like, beautiful. And that was where I got the name of the zine from. So
that's great.
He's hooked me up. He's hooked me up with the Green Day cover and the title. So Chris, if you listen to this, I'm giving you your thumbs up. and to Eric Hauser, it never would have happened without you guys. So don't say
you didn't give him anything.
I forgot anybody. Yeah. as I sit here surrounded by my Green Day money, I don't say I forgot anybody. You're just like
Scrooge McDucking your shit right now, just diving in and out of it as you're talking.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Well, it was also a big risk because I didn't just start doing the zine Just in Time for Nothing right away. What happened was I had the idea in my head, so I took a story that I wrote called Gun Control, and I made like it was only about 4 pages long, and I made a little zine out of that. And I went to a show at Montclair State College. I can't remember what band it was. I think it was like Ensign or somebody or some other bands. And I just handed them out to everybody. I made like 100, and I just gave them away for free. And then about a month later, I did the same thing with a story called A Monday Night in Dakota, which is actually in Just in Time for Nothing. And I just handed them out for free just to get responses, and people seemed to like them. And I said, okay, now I can do the zine. And I put more effort into it after doing it for free. And I only sold the zine. They were $1 an issue. So it wasn't like, anybody was breaking the bank buying one. But
I do remember
that was kind of like testing the water.
Yeah, I remember that you did charge for them, right? From issue 1 up to 4.
Yeah.
It only released.
Yeah. Yeah. I never made any money. All the money went right back into the printing.
Yeah, I mean,
nothing.
Well, if you think about it, even if you sold all 100, you made $100 fucking dollars. I mean,
that was a big deal to me back then.
That's true, actually. I mean, that's like gas money to get to the Rockaway Mall, and $5 to get into a show, or like many shows.
There you go. Yeah, 4 if you had a can of food.
Everyone always mentions, everybody pretty much in every episode, they're like, yeah, $5 with a can of food, man, like, or $4. Right. What the first one comes out, so you did these stories. When you got feedback, was that like in person, or did you leave your phone number? Because obviously email wasn't a thing then.
I don't think anybody wrote me any letters from the 2 free ones, but I still have a bunch of mail from the zines at home. It's so funny. My friend Mickey, who I met years later, he's a good friend of mine. I met him at the Loop Lounge when I was DJing there in like 2005. And I was going through my stuff when my wife and I moved last year and a half ago. And I found a letter that was written to me about Just in Time for Nothing. And it was written by his brother. It was so weird. I was like, oh my God, this is so weird. And I had to call him and said, do you have a brother named Pat? And he said, yeah. And I said, oh, I have a fan letter from him here. So it's really strange.
So people literally were fucking where they were mailing you fan letters.
Yeah, I got a lot of pretty cool stuff. I mean, it was pretty amazing at the time. It was funny because my father, like, I lived at home, so my father like had no idea what I was doing, and he's like, "What the hell is this just in time for nothing? What the hell is this? Like, where's all this mail coming from?"
That's so fucking awesome.
Yeah, I tried to get a PO box, but it was too much work, so I never did. Luckily, no one ever showed up at my house. That's like the biggest thing I didn't want to happen was anyone ever coming and bothering.
Yeah, and PO boxes I think are like $50 a month or some. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something like that, which we really couldn't afford back then. But so the first issue comes out. What was the collaboration of stories? Because I remember getting this, and I remember when when we'd see you, we're like, dude, we fucking love this. But I can't for the life of me. And I remember a lot of them were personal stories. And I remember your brother was a part of them, right? And so the first issue was one story. What was it about again?
Oh, it was called A Glimpse of My Future, and it was about a kid in the 6th grade who likes this girl at school, who's kind of popular, but she's nice to him, and they go to this dance, and she ends up with the guy that kind of picks on him, kind of like a very typical 80s story, but through the point of view of a kid who's about 12 years old, who idolizes his brother, and at the end he kind of realizes that his brother's not as cool as he thinks he is. That's my favorite story, honestly, out of all of them. I really like that story a lot.
It almost reminded me of like Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Before Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Yeah, exactly. I remember when I read that book years later. I mean, I read that book in 2002, and I'm like, this reminds me so much of your zine.
Yeah, that was recommended to me. I've never read it, but I've seen the book before. I haven't actually read it. So I'll look at it one of these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically about like a kid who grows up and he's got an older brother, and I mean, it's got a weird. The ending is like kind of weird, but it's like that thing of like idolizing someone and just their growing pains and that all that shit we went through back then. But I totally cut you off when you were saying what you liked about it. But
I mean, it was and it's a fiction story, and all of them are. I mean, they're all based in some way on something I experienced, but that one, I have 2 brothers actually, so that guy's kind of a composite of both of them. But there's some things in it that are very similar to my childhood growing up, and other things that aren't. Like, for example, I never asked that girl to dance at that dance. I wasn't as bold as that kid. But
why did you go in that route though of from me just being someone who wrote songs, it was always true, like whatever I was feeling, and I would just kind of beef it up with some interesting words or make sure it rhymed but like make sure it went in a good aspect, but it was always true. Why did you choose to kind of fictionalize some of it?
Well, that's a loaded question. In Just in Time for Nothing #4, there's a story called A Friday Night in New York, and the first line says, "If you ever write about my girlfriend again, I'm going to beat the living shit out of you." Mm-hmm. And it's like a guy saying that to a guy that wrote a story about his girlfriend. And that might have been one of the fears that I had, was that if I was too personal, somebody would be upset. And, it's just one of those things where it's like, why are you, I guess, a dragnet kind of thing. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
Right. Absolutely.
Kind of. And also because I don't think that anybody should have their life kind of put out there like that. I think in a song it's easier because it's a little vague, but in a story you're really diving into the character where you're diving in. So it wasn't like, and some of the things, I had to fill in the gaps, like take that story, for example, where like, yes, I did like this girl. I was in the 5th grade. She was in the 6th grade. This is the real behind the scenes to that story.
Okay.
And I have no idea if she had a sister, but I kind of had to add one to make the story work and flesh it out and explain what was going on with the brother. So it all kind of just started with the germ of something that I experienced in 1985 and took it from there. So
yeah, no, I mean,
it really,
I mean, there was a time I wrote it. There was a time I had a breakup with this really bad breakup with this girl, and I wrote these 5 acoustic songs, and they're brutal. I mean, they are raw and brutal. And one said, it's, the first line is like, today I took all your things, like douse them in gasoline and lit it up and fire. Like I was just literally sitting there looking at a box of shit that was like our memories, and I'm sitting like, I wonder if I fucking lit this on fire. I'm like, oh, that's a good line. So to actually do that, so there is a creative, there is a point when you're writing where you're like, sometimes reality is just kind of like just flat, even though
Mm-hmm.
people can emotionally connect to it. So when you add that creative freedom to it, it's like, yeah, songwriters definitely do that. And in writing, I think, like you said, you had to fill that gap. You're like, how does this work in this direction if this thing doesn't exist? Like, well, as a writer, you're kind of like, well, I can do this because I can just put, based on a true story, or just like fiction with a little bit of reality in it, or some shit like that. And people can get away with
Right. And and it's strange because like looking back on it all these years later, I like with more hindsight than I guess I had. I wrote that story when I was like 20, and it's based on something that happened to me when I was like 11. But looking at it now, sometimes I see so many more things like in the actual reality of the story with that particular person and the other people that were involved, that maybe now at 42 I could actually write a nonfiction version of that story and make it as interesting as the fictionalized version, but I just couldn't see it when I was 20.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's many things we could see 20 years ago.
Oh yeah,
for more clarity now.
That there's a lot. Well, I had that conversation with one of my brothers recently because I was talking about the street we grew up on and how crazy it was, and I'm like, I don't even know how I could turn this into fiction because it would just be ruining it. Like the truth is just greater than anything I could ever make up, but I wouldn't want to do that to
do you ever,
people.
So do you ever find though that there's authors out there that have gone completely balls out, and when you read it, if they're someone that you don't know, you kind of think like, well, that makes sense that they let loose because you don't know them, and it's almost like you not idolize them. I can't think of the word. Fuck. But you put them on. Fuck, I can't think of the word. But it's someone that you know. There's kind of it's weird that you wrote that. Do you ever find that?
Yeah. But then once again, it's hard to always tell when someone's really telling the truth,
I think that people though that they're scared to let go because they're like I had a blog years ago. I got divorced and I wrote in a line. I was like, it was about the guy that she left me for because we were friends. Like we had talked about this before we got on the phone. And one of the lines I wrote, and it I literally wrote what happened. I was like, this is what fucking happened. And I did it like in a creative way at the end. But I was like, if I ever, if you ever fucking get hit by a truck, I'm like, I hope you get hit by a truck one day and I'll be there to piss on your body. Like that's how I felt. And I was like, I'm going to put this out there, but I didn't name names, but people knew who it was. And it was completely raw. And as I put it out there, people who didn't know me or was like a couple steps away from me, they were very like, dude, that was bold. That was awesome. I'm going through some hard times. But people that were really close to me were like, yo, man, you should really take that down. It's making me uncomfortable. And I'm like, you know what? No, fuck you. Like, this is real. And I don't care if this makes you uncomfortable because it's just raw and I'm just going to put it out there. And it's like when people are that close to you, they're like, oh, that story makes me uncomfortable. But then they can go and read like a Stephen King book and his mind is like all over the fucking place. And people are like, well, that's okay because he's Stephen King. You're like, yeah, but what did his mom say originally, or his cousin or his best friend? They're like, dude, that shit's weird. I don't think I want to be around you anymore.
Well, looking back on those stories, I was younger, and I think that if I was to write stuff today or put anything out, it might be a little tamer.
Yeah.
Than that, just because of where I was at in my life. And one of the things that came out of Just in Time for Nothing was it kind of became my sort of personality, like where a lot of people are like, look, all those stories are about relationships and like failed relationships, basically. And I remember one time my friend Rob mentioned me, and his father was like, oh, wait, is that the guy with all the girl problems? Like, because his brother Brian must have said something, and it was like, wait, like I have an identity now. And that's the hard thing about, I guess, the musician writer thing is you kind of become a character.
Yeah.
And then it's hard to shake, and it is, and it's so far removed from my life today, but I had no problem back then really doing it, and I didn't ever want to really hurt anybody through telling the story as is or make them uncomfortable. So, you would change it, then also change it to make it more dramatic or more interesting, make it wrap up a little more. So one of the things that's really funny is I mentioned before the story, A Monday Night in Dakota, and that story is in Just in Time for Nothing #3. And that story people really liked a lot. It was a story about a girl on a date with a guy, and it was all from her point of view. But I think every time someone read it, they were assuming that this was really what the guy thought she was thinking about him, because it was really brutal. Like, she was really ripping this guy up through the whole date.
Yeah.
And, obviously I'm not inside of any girl's head. So it was fiction. Certain things were true. Before we started, when you were talking about saying during the interview, using words like and
yeah,
during the interview, and to be how you got to be cautious of that when you're doing interviews. There's a line in that story where the guy says to the girl something like, "I'm a little nervous, so just to let you know, tonight's going to be full of a lot of yeahs, ums, and that's cools."
That's awesome.
And she says, "I'm not sure what he means by this. I can only assume that he's nervous and it'll be hard to find the right words when talking to me."
Yeah.
And when we were putting that together, my friend Eric, who was typing it up, said, "Dude, nobody would ever say this. You got to take this line out." And I said, "Eric, that's a direct quote out of my mouth from that date."
That's great.
So it was like, and a funny story about a Monday Night in Dakota was, and if anyone ever wondered what that's from, it was actually the Dakota Diner on Route 46. That's now the Montville Diner. That's where that's supposed to take place.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, it sounds like a pornographic movie, A Monday Night in Dakota. At the time, not too many girls had the name Dakota, but when I was thinking about it the other day, I thought, oh, this could be totally misconstrued as to being some sort of pornographic reference, but that's not it at all.
I thought it was just like you were literally in Dakota, like north or south, just at some random diner or some truck stop shit on the side of the road having a date.
It was the Dakota Diner in Montville, and a lot of the stuff in that is fiction. And one of the things in it that's fiction is there's a line where she says he keeps talking about an author named Charles Bukowski and some musician named Billy Bragg, like I'm supposed to know who these people are. Listen to this. About 5 years later, I'm at Barnes & Noble in Union Square watching Billy Bragg play an acoustic show, and I brought the zine with me, and I gave him the first 3 issues of the zine. And the girl that story was based on was standing in front of me to meet him. And I had no idea she even knew who Billy Bragg was.
Get the fuck out of here. So
crazy,
that's
right?
Nuts, dude.
Yeah. I totally added that line there's a couple Billy Bragg references in that third issue. On the front, it says the not so difficult third issue. That's like a homage to his album, Talking to the Tax Man About Poetry, because on that album, it says the difficult third album. So I wanted to give him the zine and be like, oh, you inspired me. And there she was in front of me.
Did you happen to show her and be like, "Hey, this line is based on you," or you were like, "I don't want to do that"?
I was with my girlfriend at the time.
Oh yeah,
so
that would have been a bad idea. Yeah, abort, bad idea.
Abort, yeah, but I wanted to tell him like, "Oh, you don't get it. Like, that's the girl. This is the And of course, I used to give Just in Time for Nothing to like anyone I could, like celebrity wise or who I thought was cool. So Billy never contacted me. Henry Rollins has the first 4 issues. I gave them to him. I never heard from him. So
wow.
Rats, but still, hey, whatever.
How long?
It's all good.
How many years did it take you to put out the 4 issues?
Oh, just 2 years. They were pretty quick.
So you were like busting through them like 2 a year.
Yeah. I hit the roadblock because I put out the first one came out in November of '97. The second one in December, real quick. The third one in February, and the fourth one that summer. And then that was when I decided that I had to. I wanted to make it like a continuous story, and I was going to put out a book that I wrote. The first novel I wrote was going to come out through the zine, and I went through so many different versions of it. I have about maybe 3 different layouts of it at home, and I don't know what happened. Like there was so many times between 1998 and 2001, it almost came out about 4 times, and I just never did it. And then next thing you know, my life kind of changed, and I started. I mentioned before I was a DJ in New York for 7 years, and that was my whole life. Was that whole kind of early 2000s New York scene and being involved in that.
Were you spinning punk rock or were you spinning like dance stuff?
I was spinning. It depends on the night. The night that basically funded my other nights was I was doing like new wave and like old 80s rock and stuff. And I made a good amount of money off of that. And then I would do other nights, right? I would do punk rock. I would do old 60s soul and garage, Britpop nights. All different types of stuff.
That's awesome.
Couple of weddings in there.
Do you, yeah, that's where they really make the money. Do you find, and we're literally at an hour exactly right now, so I bet this is like so fucking good. Yeah, usually, has anyone ever reached out to you besides myself, like recently, and talked about the zines?
This girl reached out to me in 2004 on MySpace and wanted them, and that's the last I heard from anybody.
So you have a bunch of them still sitting around?
Not a lot, but I have enough if anybody's interested in them.
So have you heard of CreateSpace?
No, I don't know CreateSpace.
So CreateSpace is a free platform on Amazon, and you can upload books, and they don't charge you for anything. And what they do is they sell them, and you can order your own copies for your own, if it's less of a rate, and you could charge after that. Or people can find them through Amazon, and then you get like a cut based on what you charge. And I think if you're ever looking for a way to get your shit published, or even that, or any new stuff, you can go through there and just you upload it, and you put a cover, and the book's ready to go, and they print them on demand.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely look into that, because I haven't put anything out in years, but
yeah,
I'm not saying it's over. Life has been kind of a roller coaster of events, and
and having a kid too can definitely get rid of your time.
Yeah, I had the whole DJing thing and then stopped, and then I had to spend years putting my life back together after that, and met my wife, married her, had a kid, changed careers, everything. So
hey man, you're still alive though. I think people kind of dismiss, I think a lot of themes that I'm trying to get people to dismiss is like, I'm in my 40s, I'm close to 40, no one said this, but like I'm in my 80s, and I think that people put this bullshit term or definition on something based on what everyone else tells them. But it's like, man, if you're still fucking breathing and you can find 10 minutes here and there, that adds up really quick and compounds. So it's like something you're really passionate about, like me, right? Like I'm spending hours every week on this podcast, and I have my own business. Like this, what pays my bills is doing my animation company, but I have so much love for doing this that I'm like, I'm not getting paid for an hour and a half of doing this, and then for the other 2 hours to edit it, and then for the other stuff. But I'm like, I love it so much that I'm making fucking time. I'm also single and don't have kids, but I think that, if you're fucking breathing, you're alive, and you have a passion for something, you should fucking do it.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. I think that it's just a matter of time management.
Yeah.
And being dedicated to it. I mean, look, if I don't want to even go down that path of weird analogies, but I'm just saying, if people want something bad enough, you can get it. And you can definitely get it. I think what it comes down to is like, I have 4 books. 2 of them are rough drafts, like kind of, I just have to rewrite. And I have 2 other ones in my head that I think about constantly. And it's just a matter of, I think the thing that has prevented me from doing it is really just making sure I'm ready. And saying this is what I want to put out, because they're all connected.
Yeah, but you know what, dude?
In a way,
you know what? That's where it stops you. It's the moment when I ever do anything and I go, I don't know if I should do this. That's the moment where I go, publish.
Yeah,
and
right.
I think you should read this book. It helped me out a couple, like last year. It's called the War of Art. It's fantastic. It's about this guy who wrote that Bagger Vance book, whatever the fuck that was, made a movie years ago. And it just talks about his whole process where he's just like, every time I sit down on the computer, there's this wall of resistance. And he talks about, he's like, just this resistance that gets in your way. He goes, everyone has that, and you just have to push through it. And all of a sudden, when you break through that in that first minute, that's what stops you. But once you get through that, he's like, it'll come in again. You'll question yourself, but then you get in flow, and then you work through it. So there's never this moment where, there's times where I'm doing interviews and people want to talk at like 8 o'clock at night. And I'm dreading it, because I'm like, I don't want to fucking, sit around for 4 hours just dicking around until an 8 o'clock interview. But the moment I get in an interview, it's like a fucking high.
Sure.
So there's always, everyone who's creative, or anyone in general, hits resistance. But I think that what you're going through is that wall, and you just have to be like, well, yeah, it's like if I'm going to the gym, I'm not thinking about lifting the weights and hating it. I'm thinking about the fucking high I'm going to have afterwards. So the high you'll get afterwards, I think it's something you should think about and just try to live in what that would feel like to you.
It is. The thing that helped put things into perspective for me is that it's funny when you mention that you saw me DJing in Hoboken, and I knew that night. That was the last night I ever drank 11 years ago.
Holy shit, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's why I knew the date on that. and I just
Wow.
didn't work out the way I guess we'd like to think it would. And
Yeah,
I spent
absolutely.
a lot of time doing a lot of work, getting to know myself, learning about different things. Went back to school, got a couple degrees, did a bunch of stuff since then. And I kind of, during that time, just wanted to really get to know myself to a point where I feel comfortable before I sat back down at a typewriter
Yeah.
and said, here we go. Because for me, writing is, well, one, to entertain people, and two, because I have a lot to say about society and just the world we live in, not preaching, but just kind of presenting.
Yeah.
And saying, whether or not you just identify with it and say that it's cool, whether or not it changes your life, awesome. As long as it doesn't make you go out and do anything bad and hurt anybody, I guess it's pretty cool. I mean, that's what's funny though, is I remember people reading the zine and just like getting their interpretations of some of the stories were totally not what I had in mind, but there were some where I was like, wow, that's a better interpretation than what I sat down to write. So great, as long as you're not going to go shoot up any place and leave this at the scene of the crime and say that it did it.
Yeah. Or have a copy in your back pocket. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, I mean, think about how you deciphered all the band's songs that you've loved. Think about the Descendants. Think about fucking All. Two of the same band almost, but basically, like, the lyrics that you come up with. I mean, they can come up to you and they're like, "Man, that was actually about my cat." And you're like,
"Oh yeah." The song, there's an All song called Frog that Scott Reynolds talks about and makes fun of that he wrote, and he's like, no, it's just about a frog. And all these people on Facebook were like, no, doesn't this mean about like how you're younger and you don't appreciate things? That's what I thought it was about. He's like, nope, guys, it's not that deep. And I'm like, well, forget what you say. This is what it's going to mean to me.
Exactly.
Exactly. I don't care. To me, the song Stay Free by The Clash is about a girl. When I figured out it was about a guy, I was like, you know what? Like a best friend, I was like, I'm still just going to kind of go with this, even though the lyrics say something else. So yeah, it's good. And I'm really glad that you asked me to do this, because sometimes I need to kind of take a walk down memory lane for inspiration, because I got really good reviews in Punk Planet, and a bunch of other zines were really positive about this stuff. And the thing that I think is so amazing about it was that, like I said before, I wasn't really talking about punk rock in this.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought was kind of cool. Like I didn't get my chance to unleash my punk rock stories on the world yet. they're still there. So it was cool that kids could identify with it. I remember a girl told me she wrote a book report and got an A on it, was like, oh, this was the book I read just in time for nothing. Some woman, it might've been the same girl, but some English teacher that my brother knew called him and said, is your brother a writer? Because one of my students, gave me these zines to read. Like,
wow.
Yeah, it was really strange, just a really weird time, and I was definitely, it was definitely a high point for me. I did this therapy once called EMDR, which is for trauma.
Is that tapping? Is that the tapping stuff?
Yeah, they do the thing where they move your eyes back and forth with the finger.
I've done that before.
And at one point, you had to do a high point. And I'll be honest with you, one of them, I don't remember where it was, but I was outside one of the shows, and it was when Just in Time for Nothing #3 came out, and I got like a mad rush of people come up to me and buy them. And I was telling someone like, oh, did you get #2? And they're like, oh, we already have that. I'm like, how'd you get that? I don't even know who you are. When did I sell this to you? Like that. It was definitely a very, very creative time in my life that I cherish. And I wanted to say too about, because your show's about the scene in the late 90s. When I was talking before about how there were so many different shows, I was looking in Old Weird New Jersey recently, and I saw that JT Skate Zone in West Orange, was abandoned. Yeah. And there was all this stuff, and I was like, didn't I just go to a show? Didn't like Bigwig just play there last week?
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that the place was abandoned and
all those places,
I'm like, wasn't that just like yesterday that I was out there selling zines? It was so weird.
Yeah, there's actually, so Chris, who was in Lanemeyer, I mentioned this a couple times in other interviews, he went there while he was driving around for his job a couple years ago and took pictures of it, and he was like, yeah, I went inside, it's just, and I remember too, it was just kind of off of a main road, and it was down like not a hill but like a slant, and then it was just there, and it was surrounded by woods. And he said it was just like abandoned, and he went inside and everything was broken and shit, and you're like, fuck, man, that's crazy. And it's like, I literally, there's an idea I have where I want to get someone who's good at programming to make like what's the word, like a interactive map, like a Google Maps kind of, and then put the locations and have people upload like where the West Orange Legion Hall was, where JT Skate Zone was, where the Wayne Firehouse was, and then have that be like those little dots on the map, and you click on it, have people upload old pictures of like what they had back then from those places.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
Like,
you know, I mean, because
cool.
you have all these books. You know, there's the book about city gardens and the movie and all these places, and there definitely should be something to document this scene and what was going on.
Yeah,
because it was pretty active. Well, there was a roller rink in Wayne, right? That used to have shows.
Gators World.
Yeah, I remember going there, and
that's where I think we got our first issue from you. You were walking around at a show that we might have been playing, and that you had like, didn't you have like a side bag that you kept them all in? Am I remembering this right?
Yeah.
I had them, yeah.
That was interesting. That was really
I think funny. No, dude, I'm telling you, I think you should definitely, and I'm not going to keep harping this, but I think you should just think about, you know, don't just leave here and be like, I'm going to put this shit up, but just think about it until the fear becomes like, you know, way smaller, and you're like, this would be fucking awful.
Yeah.
Even if fucking 3 people buy it, just the fact of putting something
that it's out and that it's done.
Out.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I did with the podcast. I was just like, I don't know if anyone's going to fucking listen to this. I'll just put it out. And then people are like, we really enjoy this. I'm like, that's awesome. And then I have to kind of balance it where it's, you know, I don't do it just because people are liking it. I have to do it because I enjoy this. Like this last hour and 12 minutes is like a fucking high for me. You know, and then when I'm editing, it's a high, and then when I get to like listen to it on Fridays, it's a fucking high. So even if I'm like, I know it's right because I'm entertained by it.
Right.
So,
right. And I keep seeing these things out there, like it's funny because since I stopped doing the zine, like the sort of young adult literature has exploded. Where you walk into a Barnes and Noble, and there's all these stories, you know, about like kids and stuff, and you have these TV shows like 13 Reasons Why and all this stuff. And I watch them and I'm just like, oh man, my stuff, like I could be insecure at times, but I'm like, my stuff was so much better than this and so much more real, you know? It's like,
yeah, man.
Like, I don't know. I was watching that last season of 13 Reasons Why, and it was like the punk kids, and it was just all wrong. You know, it was all wrong.
Yeah, man. I mean, you have so much,
it
sounds like you have so much knowledge from back then, and you have like a very photographic memory of names and things like that, of the things that matter to you. You know, I'm sure there's things in the past where you're like, I have no idea what the fuck this was, but if it was in the music scene or something like that, you're like, I can remember this, I can remember this story, I remember this specifically because it matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the plan with the 4 books is kind of, I really want to, like I said, they're all fiction.
Yeah.
Based on real stories. But, you know, if I was to put these all out, it would basically go from 1992 to 2011. And, of course, whatever the plots are, I discuss what's going on culturally at the time, because I think that's important. I think just the way that Gleaming the Cube movie introduced me to that Dickie song, like, even though I'm not writing a book about the Descendants, I would love for someone to read and say, entertain this. But by the way, I'm going to go on Wikipedia and see what this Descendants is all about.
And they would.
I'm at the point where I even feel like if I do put these out, I even want to put like a glossary in the back. Like, don't leave until you know what I'm talking about.
That's genius.
Not that
dude.
I just, because someone did this. Someone sent me a story once that they must have read like A Glimpse of My Future, and the whole story was them just name dropping bands, and I was like, oh, you forgot the plot. You know, like it wasn't just about me saying the Smiths, Duran Duran. It was a plot. Like this was all just background, and
it was peppered in at the right time.
But you know, if somebody read that story, or especially like if someone read that and said, oh, I'm going to go find out who the Buzzcocks are, I never heard them. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. I did my part of keeping music and rock and roll alive. That's important. And I think that one of the things that I've always tried to do, no matter what I've ever done, is this sounds so lame. I can't. If my wife hears this, she's going to just be like lame, because she's just like, because we always joke about this word. Is I've really grown not to like the word punk rock as an adjective for anything besides music, where people are like, you know, that's so punk. Look at that. It's like, oh my God. But I've really tried to bring that sort of punk rock approach into everything I did. And I think that's why Just in Time for Nothing, I was selling them at these pop punk shows, but I wasn't really discussing the bands at the time or even the older bands. But I think when you read it, you could tell that this is where I was coming from. And one of the greatest compliments I ever got as a DJ was I think it was Mark Ryan from the band Supertouch was at this bar I was DJing at, and he told me afterwards, he was like, "Oh, I was with this guy from the the scene back in the day," and he was like, "This is amazing. This guy's playing the Smiths, but I feel like I'm at a hardcore show." And I'm like, mission accomplished.
That's awesome.
It was like, thank you. Where it just the energy and how into it I was, and whether I'm DJing or writing or even on my job now, I just want it to be honest and real, just like that Charles Bukowski stories. It was the first stuff I read that was real, and it wasn't pretentious and trying to insult you or prove that it's smarter than you. It's to say, hey, this is life. This is who we are. These are the struggles we face, and we're real. We're not. It doesn't mean we can't use 50-cent words sometimes. Yeah. It means we just don't use them to show off.
Yeah, you don't like bombard the whole story with it, where someone's like, okay, I just don't even know what the fuck you're saying right now.
Yeah. I mean, there's books I've read. I've picked it up, and I'm just like, and I'm a pretty educated person at this point, and I'm like, I have no idea what this guy's saying. I mean, he's just. I gotta mow the lawn. I got stuff to do. I gotta get it going on.
I don't want a goddamn thesaurus in front of me where I'm trying to read a book.
Yeah, that's really it.
I mean, I think that and I've got a couple more questions, but I think two things. One, I always appreciated, and this will kind of go into the same question, but same thought. I appreciated that your zine, it was just stories, and you didn't interview bands, and that's what made it so different. It was a zine, but it was short stories. It was almost like you were your own separate band that was in the scene, but you put out lyrics and not music. And when people bought it, I think they were buying your albums, kind of, but they liked it because you were a punk kid talking about real life as a punk kid, and they were like, we like your lyrics, like we like the lyrics of that song, so we're supporting you as that.
Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah.
That made my day.
So you basically, even though you think you were in a hardcore band back in the day, but I think, your albums continued in your writing.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Much more so than the band. That was really just
something fun.
Something fun. So I was a little too old, to be honest with you, for that. I hate to say that, but it was just not if that was like 3 years earlier, would have been a totally different scene.
Yeah, you never know.
But no, that's great. I appreciate that. That means a lot.
Good, man. That's fucking awesome. Okay, so a couple more questions, and I'll let you be on your way.
Sure.
I mean, so do you still go to shows now?
Not as many as I used to, just because I was in graduate school for the past couple of years and doing an internship and working full time. And then as soon as I was done with that, we had the baby. So it's been a lot. I went to see the Misfits.
No. Oh, yeah, they just. Yeah, they just.
I came out of.
Didn't they play with
Suicidal and Murphy's Law?
Yeah, but no, isn't the original singer back in?
Yeah, Danzig. Yeah,
Danzig.
Yeah.
Oh, Christ.
So
the original. Yeah, Danzig. Jesus Christ.
I came out of retirement for that. Before that, I went to see the year before I saw Dag Nasty down in Asbury, and then I saw the Descendants in New York a while before that. Not that many. I mean, Agent Orange is playing down the street from me in a couple weeks, but I'm going to be on vacation, so I'm not going to be able to see that.
Oh,
it just depends. It all depends on the time, and usually it's got to be something that I can carve out time for, just because of the, which is all good. I'm not complaining. I love being a dad. I love being a husband and doing all this stuff, and my job and everything. This is good, and but I still every now and then I get the urge to go out and see a band, especially if it's something I've never seen before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ever since Joe Strummer died, it's like I have to see everybody at least once, because I never saw him. I turned down my 2 chances to see Joe Strummer, so it was like, well, luckily I got to see the Ramones and meet them once, so that makes me feel good.
That's a good point. This is coming to the era where, like, yesterday everyone was posting about Tony Sly. I mean, he was only 40, he's for name, and that's a different era, obviously. But there are bands out there where you're like, yeah, I'll go see him again, but you just never know if that's either going to be you or that's going to be, what's going to be the missed opportunity. So I think people would just be like, if you want to go see it, just like get off your fucking ass.
Or they just don't play. I mean, I went to see Public Image Limited in 2010, and I'm not a huge Pill fan. I thought they were good, and my friend's like, "What'd you think?" And my response was, "I can't believe I didn't go see the Sex Pistols like the 100 times they played from '96 to like now,
Yeah.
and now they probably won't play again." You know, I was like, so. But
Yeah.
there's a great, a very simplistic all song of All Roy Says that says, "If as life goes by, don't look back and wonder why you didn't see that band or kiss that girl and hold her hand." And I don't really think nowadays, you know, I'm content and in love with my wife, so it's really the bands, you know.
Yeah.
I tend to get a little mad that I didn't see. Other than that, life is content.
It's like I almost feel like I want to end it there, but I'm going to ask you this one question,
Sure. Go ahead.
Even though I might cut this part out because I thought that was a great way to end it. So I ask this to everybody at the end of every interview. So even though I think I already know the answer, but what scene ethics do you still hold on to this day?
What scene ethics do I hold on to today? All right, watch me because my thoughts are kind of all over the place here.
That's fine.
When I was DJing in New York, one of the things that bothered me initially was sometimes I would DJ or I would hang out with other DJs that would have nights that had like dress codes, or they would have a line to get in and you'd have to be waiting to get in. And I knew a lot of people, so I never really had to wait on a line to get into a place. But when I first started hanging out around there, I thought, you know, this is absolute bullshit. This is rock and roll. This is New York. You don't wait online. This isn't club kid crap. You know, like, you know, you got your money. You got the right to come in and have a drink and rock out or whatever. And over time, I guess, once I started getting into these places, I kind of started paying attention to it less, but it kind of bothered me at the same time. No night that I ever did was like that. But looking back, I'd say that the thing I like about punk rock and the scene is that it just didn't matter. You weren't going to be turned away at the door because you didn't have a mohawk or dyed hair, or you didn't look like something out of it, like an American Apparel ad or a Hot Topic ad. Like, it was real.
Yeah.
And it just, you know, sure, there were people who were jerks. There's jerks in every little social circle who judge people. And, you know, I'm sure whatever, especially with like, you go to a straight edge hardcore show, I'm sure you see the little, you know, cool kids that have all their X watches on and their little clicks, looking at other people cross if they don't have on the right sneakers or something. But all in all, that stuff is pretty minuscule in the big picture. And I didn't feel that way in the pop punk scene in New Jersey. I never felt that there was like a dude that was going to a show or a girl that was being overlooked or kind of judged, or maybe it happened, I don't know, but it just seemed much more accepting. And it was kind of like, you know, 7 seconds, man, walk together, rock together, right? Come in and have a good time. And to me, that's the most important thing. It really doesn't matter what you look like, what you dress like. It's about you and just your attitude. And I think in punk rock, no one should ever be made to feel like they don't belong. You know, I mean, unless you're going there and beating the crap out of people and causing problems, then that's another story. But if you're there to see a band, there's no reason why you should be turned away or made to feel weird because you don't have the right clothes or the right amount of piercings or whatever it is that is in style at the time. So I think that it should be a safe place for people to call home. You know, my wife was telling me the other day how they're going to stop doing the Warped Tour. And I've only been to one Warped Tour ever. I never really was at a lot of Warped Tours. Is
that the one in '97 when it was in Asbury Park?
Yeah, it was like all Rancid. I think Civ played the specials and stuff. I have a story about that, but I'm not going to go into it. It just reminded me of something that kind of ties into what I'm talking about. But like,
say it. There's not like a fucking cap.
Nah, it was just weird. You know, there was a very strange couple bought Just in Time for Nothing for me that day. Like, it was a little weird. It's just weird that this is coming up because I'm feeling like kind of strange saying this. I feel a little, and I'm just going to leave it at that. There was something very odd about them. And I was even kind of like handing them the zine and handing me the money, and I felt a little weird. And I got like the best letter, and I'm sure it was this girl. I'm sure it was from her. I got like one of the best letters in the mail like a week later about how much she liked the zine and stuff about her life. And it was really like, it made me feel kind of like a jerk because I was kind of, I'm not going to go into why I felt this way, but something kind of weirded me out. And I just was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, this is like these people kind of stood out like kind of sore thumbs, because even my friend was like, did you see those two? And I'm like, yeah, they bought a zine. And I'm pretty sure it was her who wrote me the letter, and it was really moving and really, really great. And you know what, man, we all have our little biases and all this other, crap, but I think in punk rock we're able to push through that.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think it's just that happens to everybody, and and it's always nice to, because you could be like, I'm a fucking asshole, but it's nice when sometimes it's nice when you're wrong, because it also gives you it gives you a nice lesson, so moving forward you don't do that. So I think a lot of those things are there for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you don't carry that for the rest of your life and just judge people. It's like it kind of pokes in. It's like, hey, you're feeling that way, like you shouldn't. And you're like, oh wow, I'm glad that the next 20 years of my life I'm going to be less judgmental for some whatever
reason. Exactly. It was definitely a learning, definitely a learning experience where I thought I was, because everyone likes to say, I'm open-minded. Then you're put to the test and you're kind of like, oh, I don't know if I'm that open-minded. But then you're like, you know what? That's awesome. And I totally, totally get it. So that is the thing. I think that's like, just to even go full circle back to where we started from, why I was so protective of punk rock when it started getting a little more popular, is it is that safe place. It is that place where you can get away from the mainstream and say, you can go do what you want. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to hang out with people, and our friendships are going to be real, and it's okay. And it bothers me that there's not much of an alternative. I don't see a lot of kids wearing band T-shirts anymore. I don't know if there's a big scene, but I kind of wish there was. I kind of, it would make me feel good to know that somewhere tonight some kids handed out a bunch of flyers at the mall and they're playing some songs and just doing something.